that Eliane's presence is part of a series of initiatives conducted by several cultural institutions. Here at the University of São Paulo and at the Contemporary Art Museum, we have been collaborating with these events to ensure dialogue, to share knowledge, and to have an exchange with the thinking and indigenous cultures in Brazil. Very recently, MAC, together with the Department of Anthropology from the University of São Paulo, we organized an event about the presence and the absence of indigenous peoples at the University of São Paulo. It was a 3-day event with the participation of several researchers, important leaders, activists, students, professors who are focusing on this topic and on this reflection about affirmative action at our university, the University of São Paulo. Within the same program, we are proud to have in our board, we're proud to count on an indigenous artist from São Paulo. Actually, she's from the state of Bahia. She actually corrected us because she said that Bahia is the invention of white people. We have inhabited this land that has now these frontiers that you, white people, created. And today, she currently is living in a village, in a reserve at Pico do Jaraguá, here in São Paulo. Fernanda, specifically, has been conducting lots of efforts to review our collection, to review our practices as curators and our research practices by attracting new researchers, artists, and thinkers. And they know how important Eliane is. Based on this work that we've been doing, I would like to welcome Eliane, and I would like to thank you, Eliane, for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome all of you once again. We have here several students that are with the story, art history, and indigenous peoples syllable. I would like to thank my colleagues from the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts. All the colleagues who are here with us. I'd like to thank you for helping organize this event and also the webcast to our colleagues in the US. I'm thankful for Ana Magalhães, former director at MAC, for accepting this collaboration and the new director for making it happen. This presentation would not be possible without the support of my friend and collaborator, Fernanda. She's committed to writing art histories that make indigenous perspectives as a centerpiece, such as the one we have today with Eliane Potiguara, who is today's speaker. Eliane Potiguara is a writer, a professor, a poet. She has a degree in literature and education by the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. She specializes in education. She received the Dr. Honoris Causa title from the same university, the first indigenous woman to receive this title in Brazil. She also was named, or she received the Order of Merit in 2014 here in Brazil. Eliane has worked for the World Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the UN. She's one of the most renowned authors of indigenous literature in Brazil. Thinking about Eliane's literary work in isolation from her social and political commitment does not make sense. She was born in 1950 in Rio de Janeiro. She's the daughter of a family of Potiguara exiled parents. At a very young age, she started working in politics, and she founded the Indigenous Women's Educational Group. That shows that she was always active at different levels of the Indigenous movement. Her innovative book, Metade Cara, Metade Máscara, half face, half mask, and we have some copies of the book here, is one of the most read books in the Indigenous movement in Brazil. The book is made of different structures, different narrators, showing fictitious elements and factual elements as well, and drawing connections to her biography and to the history of Indigenous peoples. Metade Cara, Metade Máscara is also a reflection of the fight of Potiguara women, and it talks how water and nature have a central role. Several poems in the book show women leadership in Indigenous societies, highlighting the relationship between women and nature. Eliane has published many books in national and international anthologies as well. Last year, she launched her 8th book, O Vento Espalha Minha Voz Originária, The Wind Spreads My Native Voice. Today, Eliane is going to talk about cultural preservation, and she's going to talk about water. She's going to talk about water as an essential element and how it refers to several dimensions of existence. So please join me in welcoming Eliane Potiguara. I'm going to sit down, if I may. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I could not begin my presentation about such a beautiful and sacred topic, such a special topic, which is water. Water for this present moment of reflection about what is going on on planet Earth right now concerning our water. Water that needs help. 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 Water is crying for help. I need to be saved. That's what the water is saying. Our spiritual guides, our forces, our ancestral forces, our ancestors is here with us right now in this sacred moment, in this moment for reflection, and in this moment of light. This is the light of humankind. I would like to thank Professor José Lira. It is a pleasure to be here in this institution at the Contemporary Art Museum. I would also like to thank National Gallery from Washington, because I know that I'm speaking directly to this people that is connected to the arts through this gallery. So I salute you all with a lot of light. For all of you, dear listeners, dear admirers, I would also like to thank the University of São Paulo, USP, through Professor Fernanda Pita, and I would also like to thank my assistants. I would like to thank them for everything. My dear friend, the love of my life, Val Afonso. He's here today beside us, an amazing spiritual, physical, and mental support for me. Last year, I published, actually this year, early this year, I published this book, O Vento Espalha Minha Voz Originária, The Wind Spreads My Native Voice. It is a cry for help. It is a request for entities, for organizations, institutions around the world. Please look at the indigenous matter in Brazil. Although we have been working for over 50 years in this country, the indigenous movement has been focusing on this agenda, looking from a legal perspective, from a policy perspective. We still have a deficit. We still have some reserves from big businesses in Brazil, and most of all, agribusiness that oftentimes is connected to the government. Right now, we have an administration that is concerned with indigenous matters, but we have this major power behind our lands because we live in indigenous lands and we still have to fight for our land. The previous administration has left marks through a legislation that restricts the rights of indigenous peoples in Brazil of occupying their lands. And those who are now occupying these lands, now there is a timeline for them to leave these places, these lands. So how will these people live? In the past, indigenous peoples were emancipated during the Marquês de Pombal rule in Portugal. Since 1910, actually 1856 and then 1910. 1910 is a landmark with the creation of the Service for Indigenous Protection. Then during the military dictatorship in 1964, in all these periods we have important landmarks. And we observe that the Brazilian state tends to want to emancipate. And what is the meaning of emancipation? It means throwing the indigenous people and making the indigenous people subject to a society that is not producing legislation, is not producing policies, so that indigenous peoples can live in cities. It is impossible for indigenous people to live in Brazilian society. The culture, the language, the traditions, traditional knowledge, it is completely different. Indigenous peoples have an understanding of planet Earth, an understanding of water that is very different. When we talk about water, we're talking about the pedagogy of nature. The pedagogy of nature that works by preserving water, by preserving culture, traditions, and knowledge, by preserving our ancestors and our original histories. For each people, we have over 300 indigenous peoples. It's over 200 indigenous languages. It is a huge wealth. And to this day, Brazil has never acknowledged this. It has just been mentioned in the 1988 Constitution, some topics that contemplate the rights of indigenous peoples. But in practical terms, we have not managed to make this happen. when we look at the most remote places of our country, ensuring that these peoples do have these rights preserved and respected in practice. So, just throwing indigenous peoples in Brazilian society is like throwing indigenous people to the trash. Indigenous peoples will suffer the direct consequences of racism, social discrimination. Indigenous peoples will be stigmatized. Even the self-esteem of indigenous people in this country, the self-esteem suffers from the first exploitation situations when we became a colony. Then we had neo-colonialism, we have the contemporary moment, we come to the present time, and as indigenous peoples, we still have to say that we are indigenous peoples. Not even Brazilian society considers us or looks at us. We want to have a voice, and our voice is screaming. We are crying for help. We are despaired. We are weeping. We are weeping in our speech, in the speech of indigenous leaders such as Raoni, the speech of indigenous leaders from all over Brazil. We cry through the voice of indigenous women. These women are now holding important political positions because 4 decades ago we said, indigenous women organize even if it is within your households. If you know the Grumim newspaper, it was the first indigenous newspaper in Brazil, and it was written by indigenous women. If you know this newspaper, you know that we were screaming in the city of Altamira in the state of Pará. We had huge problems with hydroelectric power plants such as Belo Monte, the Belo Monte power plant, and at the time we were screaming, women, organize yourselves, come together. The first political action, the first political scene of, an indigenous woman putting a knife in the face of the director of Eletronorte, so that this business group and other business groups as well could feel the impact of these initiatives. And these initiatives became a landmark. Tuira, we just lost her just last month. She became a star, Tuira. And I hope that Tuira is now in a place where she can support us with her energy in connection with the energies of the planet and the universe. I hope that she can support us so that we can have our rights respected. I was telling you that this book, The Wind Spreads My Voice, one of the first chapters of this book, in its introduction, I have to mention this. This book gives you an overview of the unbalance of Earth and indigenous women in Brazil. And I quote, "We want to invoke the wise regard of indigenous women in building the magical, mystical, and holistic world of our everyday lives. We want to transmit to new generations this perspective. We want to tell and we want to live this as part of the natural and ancestral indigenous knowledge. Indigenous women portray this reality by their oral presentations every day, in dialogue with her people, even in a world that is genocidal and oppressive. Today, through indigenous literature, we have a way to fight and to resist, and we exist. Our existence denounces the capitalist system in a world full of stereotypes against our traditions, our indigenous habits. Instead of killing us, we stand up and we become stronger. Women and the communities become stronger. The mother's perspective, teachers, wives, militants, elders, and young girls. This perspective takes this oral aspect to cause something different, which is dialogue with universal love, with biodiversity and sustainability, the understanding of the teachings from the spiritual life, the words and the very cultural actions, the art and the language of our lives. Our territories. Indigenous women are a channel for all these concepts. Our home is the headquarters for us to become social entrepreneurs for our people. From the very early years of colonization, and even before that, indigenous peoples were valuing biodiversity and natural phenomenon such as death, such as thunder, lightning, floods, the destruction of a crop, the appearance of new societies. These are physical characteristics that are different from us, and among many things, we believe that these phenomena were a warning from the cosmos or a decision from gods. And it is not different today. We believe in the biggest spiritual wealth we have, which are our ancestors. We believe that our territories, our cultures, if they are destroyed, our people will be equally destroyed. Our indigenous identity will be destroyed, and we fight against this. Regarding indigenous women, we, in these 524 years of history, we have suffered one of the greatest violation of human rights of young girls, adult women, widowers, and elderly women. In spite of the genocidal and the cultural genocide, we survive, we fight, we dream, we are whole human beings, and we fight. We have suffered, and we still go through several types of oppression, racism, dictatorship, diminishing our feminine gender, diminishing our culture and our spirituality. We foresaw this terrible future for the land, such as disease surges, different diseases, just the flu and TB between the 1500s and the current times, with the mad cow disease, the swine flu, smallpox, dengue fever, Zika and chikungunya, to the current COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic is part of the imbalance of land, just like
just as we see with the situation of water, which was one of the topics that we should be referring to, and is totally destroying our population. I have written a speech, but I didn't know I was only going to have a 40-minute talk, so I have a 2-hour talk prepared here to read my text, where I could develop all the themes related to water. And I personally consider water the element of the greatest spiritual depth. It's through water that we're able to renew ourselves. It's through water that we're able to bathe our bodies and feel the energy that comes from the waterfalls, and that goes through our body and our cells. When we are right under the waterfall, we feel a full vital energy from deep on earth, from lakes, from seas. And I have here the first chapter to explain what is water for the indigenous populations and the indigenous peoples, and I will explain to you. Water is more than a molecule in liquid state, gas state, a river, a creek, a waterfall, the sea, a water basin. I mean, we always find the destination detouring from obstacles and carry on with its flow more than a flying river, because through the pumping of the rain from trees is concentrated on clouds to have the rainfall, to have drizzles, water, rain. It's the chemical memory of the ancestors that flow and is ongoing, going through time and space. In each drop, there's an echo that is interrupted from the first rain that touches the land. The traces of the womb where life starts to pound, and water is the activist of the cosmos, silent guardian of the older stories of the older seas, coming all the way up to the veins of the mountain. Water is the storyteller of life. So what is water for the indigenous population? It's the first element to the community. Just give. I'm talking about here water and the great joy of drinking some water to wash my throat and my soul. Without that, I can't talk about water. And for us indigenous, water is the first element, the first driver of life. Water is also the storyteller, creating the ethnicities in the story of the water is story. She apologized for not having used the mic for a few minutes. So water also symbolizes stories of life creation in communities, among people. So there are many elements, many indigenous ethnicities that are based on water as the stem of life, as their storytelling, their life storytelling, and it's brought to the community, to the population that lives there, and to all children. And this life story later on is absorbed by the indigenous writers, teachers, and professors and thinkers, so that it can reach, so the thinking about water can reach their children, and so that they can get education that is fully geared towards the culture of nature and the culture of sustainability of water. So it is education that is smooth. It's not innovative at all. This has been around for centuries. So when we see all the proposals of those who are not from the indigenous population saying that this is an innovative proposal, that comes from the wisdom of the indigenous people in any community, not only in Brazil, but all around the world. Among the Navajos and the Creeks and the indigenous of Norway, Sami, and all the indigenous population of around the world. When it comes to a story, I will tell you now, Tupac created the sky and the stars, and that's where he started to live, and right under him created the waters. So everything was normal with the sky and stars and clouds, and right under he created the water. And then Tupã went down. Tupã is the name for our creator, of God, the spirit that created earth. So he comes down in a big tornado going around, swirling, and once he touched the water, the sky showed in the arch of the sky. When the sun got to the highest level, the heat cracked the skin of Tupã. That's when he understood that there was heat, and that is where life comes from. The scorching heat of the sun will burn everything, and the moon with his tears will flood the earth, and that's why they can't get married. The moon will take down the fire, and the sun would evaporate water. Moon didn't mind that, so that is the principle. So very simple. I said it twice. So simple, so special wisdom that takes us to the importance of the sun and moon and why this is so important in nature. And when it comes to water, where people live, those from the traditional origin, we have the fishermen, we have the riverside population, the shrimp pickers, so all that live in water. So we know that the people that live in water have the wisdom of their environment, of their biome, right? Water also comes to nourish as a source of food to the crustaceans, to fish, to people, and those who live close to the regions, as in the Amazon region, those who live in Manaus. There are 18,000 indigenous individuals living in the city of Manaus and suffer and do not have public policies for their lives, as I said in the beginning of my talk. Those who live and have to pay for water, and that many times drink water from wells that are polluted, and children that end up going ill because of the quality of water. And they are called for that, while companies are getting richer and richer, and society getting sick, increasingly sick. That's what we see in the major cities, in the city of Recife, where the indigenous population is living in the indigenous community also, because of the invasion, because of all the woodpickers and miners and the hydro plants that also contaminate the rivers with all the type of products that they throw in these areas with tin, mercury. And what do you see with rivers? And we have this where the rivers lose their whole dynamics, and they are their way present now in rivers, silting them up. So this is true in the communities, not only the destruction of the waters within the indigenous land, but the obstruction of our water, of our Brazilian waters, and what is the responsibility of each one of us? That is a question, that is a challenge that we have been setting aside for the last 3 decades. 1990, well, 4 decades, when we had the World Environmental Summit in 1992, where we drafted the letter for the land, and the topic about water was raised, and also about the environment. And that's what I have been talking about lately, about the culture. There's the culture of peace. So we also do have the culture of nature, and the culture of nature must be better spread out as part of the Brazilian culture, because Brazilian people need water. How much time I still have? This water will not be enough for me. I need to have a barrel of water here so I can drink. One water will invite another water in. So science tells us that water is simple, a balanced equilibrium of hydrogen and oxygen, but there's an invisible art there. Isn't that beautiful? There is an art present. The atomic dance that builds a substance that can shape up rocks, shape up landscapes, and sustain civilizations. So I'm saying that it is an atomic dance that builds the substance that is able to shape rocks, landscape, and sustain civilizations. And what are these rocks? What are the stones? What is a mountain if not a whole system of balanced union of hydrogen and oxygen to shape up the rock? Those who study rocks know that well. And there's art there. Every molecule is a witness of the cycles that repeat themselves, of the vapor that goes up and the rainfall that just repeats the choreography of nature. In the currents of rivers, we find erosive force and also delicate force. The also strength of the breeze, which is the expression of a shared inheritance. Water brings with it the traits of everything that it touched, all the ancestral forests, the polished stone over time, the traits of their people that drank from it and was able to be satiated, all the tides and the waves unveil the secrets of the older navigating men and those fishermen that depend on it, and also went to the horizon for the gods that controlled the thunderstorms and the tides, our indigenous relatives. And that's how art is. Science is the past, present, and future, surviving and going beyond. It connects us to an invisible line that goes through generations, bringing together humans to the eternal cycle of life. When we just drink from a simple glass, we go for eternity. Drinking from a source, we're able to be aligned with all the species that before us also went after to satiate their thirst. It is the mirror of our own story, our indigenous story, the chain that brings us together of who we were and we will be. A constant reminder that within the whole tapestry of life, we are part of a continuous flow, an endless river that runs, detouring from obstacles, reaching the destination to reach the endless destination. The vivid molecules that hold the weight of eternity, each drop is a fragment of the past, that which went beyond different ages, that brought the whispers of the first rainfalls that came to land. So H2O is not a lab molecule with no soul. It is the one that goes beyond everyone. It is the main weaver of life. It is an architect that is there forming in the rocks, in the valleys, in the mountains, in the plateaus, in the basins. A patient artist among millenniums that is able to shape up the world. And within this process, we are able to situate ourselves in this poetic explanation. I mean, I definitely cannot go without having a poem made with water. We see that together with poetry, which is art, and I cannot go without mentioning the dance, the indigenous dance of the Muslims, the Indians, of the Christians, the dances of those who work with the beings of our nature as Candomblé, Umbanda, those who dance with spirituality of each of us. Isn't that true? So I'd like to talk about dance. Dance is a manifestation of bodies, but at first, it is a manifestation of our soul. It is a manifestation of our spirit, especially in the indigenous culture. When you dance, you are connecting with the Potiguaras, that's my people, and with also those from nature, those that are the peasants from nature. You cannot have any dance, the Torre, which is the dance in circle from my people. And during the dance, you cannot feel that there's more than the full expression. So dance is the full expression of the indigenous spirituality from the Potiguara's land, where the indigenous Brazilian and European ancestry, the word is caboclo that we use in Portuguese, but as others say, so when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about the caboclo, the dreamer. Then we have the word caboquinho, where this refers to children that is they're running around and all their parties that come with it. And there's great similarity with other cultures, as the culture of the Afro people that brings the manifestation of Candomblé and Umbanda. So I believe it's more because of Umbanda that is closer to the caboclo from the Northeast, and from the Candomblé, from the shaman, where we have a manifestation of entities from nature, and it is brought beyond from every spirit that you have, which is a nature entity. So what is spirituality? What is spirituality if not the elements of nature themselves, with the rocks, stones, rivers, nature entity, the mãe d'água, the water mother, the caboclo. I'm using more of the northeastern terms because in the Amazon, there are other names for it, the Yara, and then you have the Sasipere. So it is very rich. We're talking about folklore entities in Brazil. So we're talking about the biome, and also the Cerrado, the Caatinga, the Mata Atlântica forest from the coast of Brazil. And from all these biome, if I say the word biome again, I have to really, it's very important. So it's something that will rhyme. That's how poets are. Wherever I can have my poetry, I will get my rhyme in. And within this whole context, I want to show the wealth of spirituality. And that many of these religions that have come from other countries, they come and oppress the actual spirituality of that specific biome. So for instance, in the Northeast, the Potiguara community, where we have the spirituality based on the caboclos and what they represent, and each one represents, it can be a stone, water, a god, and they're all relatives: the sun, the grandfather sun, the grandmother moon, our sister water. So the reality of that nature and of the culture of nature brings such spirituality that comes from the core of land and that is absorbed by the caboclo, or even also by that wise shaman, which is the one that brings the greatest knowledge of traditions and of medicinal traditions for curing. And the role of the shaman or page is as a physician who will cure, and the caboclos in a Catholic spirituality would be the angels, the messengers, the ones that will bring the message and will take them, and that will be able to go beyond in a transcendent level of our universe of spirituality, from the top and from our reality, and that is connected to this very strong cosmos force, which is the energy that many people work with, the energy in the field of energy, as many do work with. So it is the process of energization, and the cultures, the indigenous ones, the Indians, those of the people in China, in Asia, and in other countries where you have shamanism. What is shamanism? Actually, shamanism is a word that comes from the Soviet Union. Indigenous shamanism is not something that does exist. Brazilian one. It exists, shamanism, from the indigenous people from Russia. And they work with different elements, with snow.
Religions, they work with the beings from nature, the entities from nature, which is the case with the candomblé. Candomblé works by making a gift, for instance, out of a chicken. You probably know a little bit of the candomblé culture when you do an offering, a gift of an animal. That is a sacred animal. The same thing with shamanism in different places. In Bolivia, you also offer the gift of an animal if you're looking for a cure, for instance. And this is not something you could call violence. There is a connection for that blood. In the beginning of civilization, it has existed. You offered the blood of sheep. I know I'm deviating and I'm traveling way to the time of Muhammad, but that's how our mind works, right? We have to go elsewhere to understand who we are as indigenous peoples. What is our role in this planet and in this country? As indigenous peoples, we still cannot tell our government what we want and all the ancestral knowledge we have for human cure. I'm going to give you an example. It's my personal example. I had a tumor in my eye. I had a tumor in my eye, and I had a tumor in my nipple as well. I was about 6 years old. Do you know how I was cured? It was even in the newspapers, in a very renowned Brazilian newspaper. After I told the story, he published it. A famous journalist called Boechat. He always talked about me in his column, and he says, Eliane Potiguara is going to launch a book in Paris and in Paraíba, in Paris and in Paraíba. So what did he mean? He was making a joke, I think. How can someone launch a book in Paris and in Paraíba? Unfortunately, Paraíba is a state that is very much stigmatized. When you say he or she comes from Paraíba, it's a state in the northeast of Brazil. And people talk about this in a very demeaning way. Talk about people from Paraíba in a very derogatory way. Oh, they only eat yucca flower. But it's such a rich culture. And even Brazilians discriminate against fellow Brazilians, just like we discriminate against Portuguese from Portugal that have colonized us. So, we tell jokes about people from Portuguese. Yeah. And we start telling jokes about people from Portugal. So there's a lot of stereotype in these jokes, in these laughs, trying to demean people. In the Brazilian case, if we talk about people from Paraíba like that, we are wrong. We have to value our own culture because we were sitting. Where were we sitting? Where were we sitting? We were sitting at the low self-esteem of colonization. That is why there is prejudice between one state and the other in Brazil. Because it's as if one people is more subject to racism than another. The state of Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil, we're flying there. Santa Catarina in the south of Brazil, it was a state with a lot of colonization. The south of Brazil is always seen as more educated, with a good colonization, which is different from the people of the north. The people of the north is the people that comes from the earth, the people of the earth, the people of the water, the people of culture. So there is this stigma among the people. And I'm saying this because I know there's people watching in the U.S. And I want our friends from the U.S. to understand. The south of Brazil their human rights are more respected than the people from the north, than the people from the Amazon, than the people of the northeast or the center-west. Unfortunately, Brazilian people we still see a difference between different regions, which is a result of colonization. The first colonization, the second wave, the fourth, fifth, until we come to this globalized world we live in. And we still have prejudice. We still face this. And this is racism. The name for that is racism. What about the cure? Someone asked. Yes, we were talking about cure. Yeah, I know. I went far away. My apologies. I'm just writing my book here as I speak. It's as if I'm writing a thesis. And that's how writers do, you know. Sometimes they find themselves alone and they're just going delirious in their own minds. They go to the second chapter and back to the first and then to the fifth. So, you know, writers are solitary figures, but our minds are going wild. But I know that sometimes we need to sort of organize our minds, otherwise we become too delirious. Yes, I was talking about cure, the cure for my tumor. And I mentioned the Brazilian journalist who published the story. He passed away already. But anyway, he always wrote about me in the newspaper because he found my stories different. So my grandmother worked with traditional cures, with principles. And my grandmother mixed, she crushed worms with spider webs and jackfruit. Do you know this mix? Have you heard of it? It's a medication. Worms, jackfruit. And pharmaceutical industry has actually used and stole this knowledge, and they created a drug with it, and this is now being sold in drugstores. The royalties of that, you know, the rights, the copyright for that, they were never paid to the indigenous people because of this creation. This is true. It is an actual mix of worms, jackfruit, and spiderwebs. I still can smell it. When I talk about it, I can still smell it. It's, you know, a memory from when I was 5 or 6 of this smell, and my grandmother put it on my eye and in my nipple. Sometimes she would place kale leaf or lettuce as well, because it smelled weird, and that's the smell I can recall to this day. So she changed my bandages in the morning and in the afternoon so that she could cure me. I have a scar, a very tiny scar. It used to be very large. I was even embarrassed of it in the past. You know, but, you know, as time went by, decades went by, 7 decades went by. And now I'm not embarrassed of it anymore. So if, you know, one of these formulas is stolen, just imagine all the other formulas. Have you heard of stevia? Stevia, you all buy stevia, right? The sweetener. Well, it actually came from the Guarani people. The Guarani, did they receive any royalties, you know, any money for this knowledge? This is what we call ancestor knowledge. This is intellectual property from the indigenous people. Isn't it interesting? And that is why, after our people went to the UN to work with the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, and we worked for 30 years on this declaration. I was personally involved for 6 years in those meetings. And then it became the permanent forum for indigenous people. In this very statement, in this declaration, we have this principle of valuing and acknowledging traditional medicine, indigenous medicine. This medicine is intellectual property, and it must be recorded, patented, so that business people transfer royalties, money stemming from this knowledge. This is the right of indigenous people. If we think of medicine, if we think of painting, body paintings, you are in São Paulo and you know that there is now a museum showing the traditions of the paintings coming from the indigenous culture and all their meaning. These paintings and drawings, they can be used by the fashion industry, by the international fashion industry. But we don't receive anything for it. So it's a broad range of knowledge. Our narratives, our life creation narratives. Many anthropologists from the past would not acknowledge our rights over these stories. These stories must be considered an indigenous heritage. Indigenous languages, our culture, our traditions, our tapestries, our weaving techniques for baskets. Working with clay, we called marajoara in the Amazon, from an island called Marajó, hence the name Marajoara. There is an amazing culture of working with clay, and also from the south of Brazil. We have baskets, the weaving of baskets. It's a broad range, it's a wealth of culture that Brazil does not acknowledge. Even hygiene habits from indigenous people. Taking showers every day. Portuguese people didn't take showers every day. They didn't smell very well. We know that some people in Europe don't take showers every day, and this is a habit that we have in Brazil because of indigenous peoples. This habit of bathing every day comes from indigenous. The habit of eating maize or of sleeping in hammocks. We have now the Day of the Indigenous People in April, and we have a variety of habits that we work with in schools so that children know that comes from indigenous people, from our cosmovision, the format of education as well, the education. Indigenous parents never hit their children. I only have 7 minutes to go. Well, anyway, I was speaking of dance, remember. Dance is the major expression of our spirituality. Yes, exactly. And we have a dance teacher here, a dance professor here, Mr. Afonso. He is a major dancer, and he's going to make a presentation here afterwards. So in 7 minutes, I have to cover indigenous literature. I must talk about indigenous literature. Meticulous records in stone and in the marks. It comes to the continent with its silent persistence. It is also the first narrator and witness of history, whispering secrets to water inhabitants from a shallow river to the depths of major oceans. It is the choreographer of a dance of tides. It is the painter of all colors, with all paints, all screens, canvases, and invisible brushes of time that paint changing landscapes and rainbows that meet sunlight. It is a poet that writes with the tips of its fingers in the sands of beaches and the mud in forests. Is the composer of an endless symphony with rhythm, melody, harmony, second to none. It creates and recreates, it draws and erases its own creations with an easiness that only time can stop. Every wave that breaks, every wave in the beach, in the shore, is a letter from the past, written through time, that tells us the origin of life, the birth of continents, the migration of species, the battles of old sailors carrying each grain of sand. Who knows how many times each grain of sand has gone through each centimeter of the planet. Water are veins and arteries of a pulsating and huge organism, larger than the planet itself. It is a guard from particles of a forgotten past, life fragments that have disappeared. Water is the very essence of memory. It's fluid, it's changing, it can retain memories of everything it touched. A universal solvent, but also a means of connection, a bond that creates generations at every water cycle. There is a re-encounter with the past, evaporation that goes to the sky and takes with it particles that have created the lost homes, the puddles in which people from different times have quenched their thirst. Rain that comes back to earth is not just rain. It is the return of something that was always here, in a cycle, in an ongoing cycle, ever since the beginning of time. In the infinite, the rain that falls, it is bringing elements from humankind. So the rain, it is not just water falling from the sky, it is history, it is a culture. Water that comes from the mountains is the same that one day caressed the leaves of ancestral forests, the same liquid that has flooded caves and created glaciers. She's a warrior, a symbol of life, of transformation, of pureness and destruction as well. At every storm, there's a spectacle of pure power. At every creek, a song of serenity. At every lagoon, at every waterfall, hairs of water. There is poetry, and at the same time, it is visceral, and it's very poetic. So with this poetry that we have, this is what indigenous writers bring with their literature. So almost 20 years ago, people, thinkers from indigenous communities that were observing the flow of water, that were observing nature, that observed the destruction of the environment, those writers that suffered and that have saw their water being destroyed, these writers, they used their words. They have used their oral traditions and transformed this into indigenous literature, which is a tool of resistance for indigenous peoples. In Brazil, we have almost 100 indigenous authors, and that is due to the poetic observation that I tried to talk about in this text about water, and then I gave a physical, material, and relational and generational explanation. We, as indigenous writers, and I have to say this, I am the first woman indigenous writer in Brazil, so give me a round of applause, please. The earth is the mother of the indigenous person. This was the name of a booklet that was launched in 1980. We launched the first indigenous book with the support of our leaders, of our pajés, of the whole indigenous community, and I get emotional to this day when I remember the day we launched this booklet. Some colleagues of Nelson Mandela from the World Council of Churches, they had a program called Program to Fight Racism. The UN, I was very much involved with the UN and indigenous peoples and other organizations. We had Betinho, a famous Brazilian activist who really supported us in this project. I was fortunate enough to launch this booklet, The Earth is the Mother of the Indigenous Person. And we launched this in a community where everyone received a copy of the booklet. These people that had spent 35 years with their heads hanging low, their culture being destroyed, their language being lost, the women, their self-esteem very low because of violence, domestic violence, even children facing domestic violence. These people that, had all these vices brought by colonizers, first the Dutch, then the French, and then the Portuguese. These people, they were sitting at a very low self-esteem. With this event called Brazilian Northeast destroyed Amazon, it was the first Potiguara encounter of fight and resistance. And that's where we launched this booklet for teachers, school teachers, and we held the first encounter of indigenous teachers, also the first encounter of indigenous women. At that time, business people were present in the encounter, and at the time, we had Ajican, the plant that produced sugar cane. They were throwing vinasse in the waters, destroying the rivers, and they caused the silting of the riverbed. Unfortunately, many indigenous people were actually connected to this business people. So there was a huge conflict between indigenous people connected to businessmen and indigenous people that wanted to bring back their culture, their traditions, their languages. There was a conflict. Actually, this conflict still exists 40 years later. We still see this conflict. And the problem of water became a matter of survival for the Potiguara people. I sometimes shut my eyes because I am reliving these moments. And when we relive a moment, we feel the same pain. So I can talk to you about the pain that woman, that child, they felt, the hunger that existed because of the silting of the rivers, killing shrimp, killing fish, killing children. Children died because of the poor quality of water. Elderly people died. They had to drink poisoned water. With that image, with the image of destruction, with the image of death, that's now when I evoke the cure of earth, the cure of the earth. 10 years ago, I wrote this book called A Cura da Terra, The Cure of the Earth. It is a calling. It is a calling to raise awareness about who we are, each and every one of us, white, yellow, green, black, whatever ethnicity, whatever continent you come from, each one of us has a role to play in raising awareness first in our homes, then in our collective societies, in our schools, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, in our regions, in our states, in our countries, in our continents, and in our planet Earth. So this is a calling. It's an invitation. Let's cure the earth. Let's cure the earth and let's cure ourselves. Let's start with ourselves. Let's consider the love between people, peoples and people. Let's bring love between people. And I invite you to read The Love Between People, which is in my first book called Metade Cara, Metade Máscara, half face, half mask. When you look at the love between people, you will be able to observe even the love between you and yourself. Because if you want to love, you have to love yourself first.
This is my claim to call for the cure of the water, of this amazing element, this magic element that is so sacred, our water relative and also our sister and brother, the water from our planet. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our ancestors and also the ones that give us energy, light, vital energy, and an essence that goes beyond me so that I can express these words to you. Thank you very much to my ancestry. We would like to just sit here and be able to listen to you for a 3-hour talk, but unfortunately we don't have this much time. I'd like to thank you very much for your presence, for your talk, for your encouragement and fight, and for you believing so that we can keep hearing you and be able to change something. Let's open to Q&A. We still have some time left over. Let's not let our translator very tired, but in any case, let's have our session open to Q&A, perhaps 3 questions. I don't know if I can cope with it. Let me see if I can. I guess my heart can cope with it.